I am now really excited to get started with our first session and kick off our first keynote. Sharon Price-John is the president and CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop. She's been there since 2013. Since then, she's led the company through financial turnaround. She's refreshed and expanded this beloved brand. She's also an accomplished author. As I mentioned, her book is going to be available in the brand bodega. It's called Stories and Heart, and she reveals events and experiences that shaped her life and then assembled that into a blueprint for making meaning in modern times. And here to interview Sharon is Emily Culp. She is on the Commerce Next Advisory Board. She has an amazing background as a retail CEO and CMO, and she currently sits on the boards of Stio, MemberMizzen, Maine, and Cordial. As I mentioned, 100 copies of Sharon's book is going to be in the brand bodega, so make sure you grab a copy of that starting at 10:05 this morning. So with that, Sharon and Emily, please join me on the Commerce Next stage.
Good morning, everyone. It is lovely to see such a big crowd out there, and I'm thrilled to be with you. Full disclosure, Sharon and I have had an amazing time getting to know each other during this whole process, whether it's the prep call to the boat cruise last night. But what I want to start with is actually a little bit back in time. You have had, I always think it's an honor to be part of heritage brands. And you have worked on some of the most amazing ones, whether it's Stride Right, Transformers, and now Build-A-Bear. I would love it if you could share with everyone here what draws you to these particular companies and how do you adapt your leadership style for each one of these unique cultures.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for having me here today. It's delightful to see everyone this morning. And that's a great question, thanks. So I have had this opportunity to work on a lot of iconic brands. And I've worked at everywhere from Mattel to Hasbro, where I was on Barbie and My Little Pony and Transformers and a number of these brands in the footwear industry as well. And I've been drawn to brands since I was a kid, basically. And I think a lot of people that end up in the branded business are, because it's not really about the product, it's about the way it makes you feel. And understanding the psychology of that is really what helps you unlock that value and monetize that value over time to consumers. And I believe that that sort of insight of loving what I grew up wanting to be was both an artist or a psychologist, and I ended up being a CEO. So maybe that all worked out. So, but I think that that's where it draws me to them. And it's also, I think, easier in the branded business when it's something that you love, because it's better for you to be able to get in touch with that psychological impact and that feeling yourself. That's where equity is created, in the way it makes you feel. So how are you making your consumers and guests feel? And if you're making them feel good, you'll grow your brand.
I would totally agree with you on the passion piece. Like, if you have the privilege to work on something that you're passionate about, I think it does come through. So that's absolutely true. Now, going back a little bit in time, during COVID, I think for me personally, this is one of the most interesting times for any CEO. And we discussed, both of us were in the midst of running companies during a turnaround, during a global pandemic, and really trying to think about how do you adapt your leadership style for such a turbulent time to help your company drive through and deliver that success. And to share with you guys, one of the interesting things we discovered, both of us love military references and books around military frameworks. I know it's a little weird, but it's quite interesting. And what we discovered is both of us during this time frame were drawn to reading about whether it's past presidents during wars, how did they pivot? What agility did they instill within their teams? And one of the frameworks, and I will say this was new to me, we'll see if I can pronounce it, VUCA?
Yep.
Yes. The VUCA framework in the military, you reference in your book. Please hold up your book, because I love your book.
I don't know that I referenced it in the book, but it's okay.
You did.
Did I? Okay.
You did. I read the book, guys. I read the book. So you referenced that in the book, but I think that would be a great framework, if you don't mind expanding on it with the whole team, because again, so many of us who were running companies had to get creative on uncharted territory and what to do.
Yeah, that's a great one. And what's interesting about that too, you started that with how do you adapt your leadership? Now,
Yeah.
I've already been through a lot of turnaround situations, whether it's brands or business units or then a company with Build-A-Bear Workshop. And you have to adapt your leadership style, not only for that situation, but sometimes for the individual leaders that are reporting up to you to get the best out of them. I think that's a really important thing to note, that it is the responsibility at certain levels for the leader to recognize how to influence, engage, and elevate each team member based on their needs. And that's a big unlock for me. The second is to recognize that different situations require different types of leadership.
Of course.
I'm a typically very collaborative leader. I like to push things down. I like to give people the tools to be able to be there at the most excellent selves that they can execute. But in a situation like COVID, which of course was an unwelcomed masterclass of leadership, it's important to recognize when you're in crisis. It's not always obvious when you're in crisis, but you have to recognize that. And if you're more of a collaborative leader, which I hope you are, because that is what would be considered best in class today,
Yes.
Is that you have to switch to command and control. Might be very uncomfortable, but you're in a situation where you do not know what's happening. You don't know the outcome. You have to make decisions and without perfect information. Very difficult. And VUCA stands for a situation which is in the military when they're sending leaders or people or troops into something that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. VUCA. And that's exactly what we were doing. All of us were in that situation. No one understood what was happening. It was very volatile, incredibly uncertain. That was the terminology, if you recall. These uncertain times, just to remind everyone and dig up some negative energy. So it was certainly, everybody pause, get it out. Very complex, and the ambiguity was overwhelming. But I think the most important thing during that time, if you were in a leadership position, clearly you'd gotten to that position for a reason. It was important to pause. You had to trust your instincts. There was no other option because the information was not worth anything. There was no data to tell you this was going to happen or this was going to happen or how to do it. Look, the rules changed every single day. There's no playbook for us, for example, and I know everyone here went through something similar, to shut down 100% of our retail locations in a 48-hour period, which was 90% of our revenue stream. So those are very sobering moments. And that's when you seek out data and information about something else, about how to manage it in these kind of volatile times, which is where this came up. We'd already actually trained our team on VUCA, which was completely ironic. But I found a quote from Nikola Tesla during that time frame that was, instincts sometimes transcend knowledge. And this was a moment when you really, really had to rely on your instincts. Because at some point, you just have to get in the zone.
But I think something, as you were just saying on your instincts, this was not your first turnaround.
No.
So that's where your instincts have been honed through prior experience.
Yes.
And you feel more comfortable and you can move at the velocity that you need to. So I think that's a key unlock.
Well, yeah, and I think all of us do that, though, Emily. You've done that in your career as well. We're gathering a lot of information, a lot of, as you say, experience. We've tried this and this didn't work. We've tried and failed. We've tried and succeeded. And you're just collecting this knowledge that you sometimes don't recognize as high value.
I completely agree with you. And I think this is also, at least for me during COVID as a leader, and getting to know you, I bet you would agree, no one did have the perfect solution. I mean, when your supply chain shuts down, you can't even fathom what that's like. Obviously, we did. But that's where I think also having an amazing community of other leaders being able to reach out to them in your network saying, what are you seeing? What are some unique challenges or options that you've created, maybe in another industry, that can help me in my industry? So I think
that did happen. I did have someone that I reported to in another role call me and ask how it was going, send me a really terrific article. The article is actually about the economic downturn, but I saw something very important in it. And I'll be careful in the postulation of this question, because I don't mean to imply that COVID was good for anybody. It was terrible.
Understood.
But this was a question that was posed on, what if the economic downturn, what if the recession was the best thing that ever happened to you? And that made me pause. And we were having what we were calling COVID meetings every morning at 8 a.m., like every single morning, Saturdays and Sundays included, because the information was changing so rapidly, with my direct reports. And the next day I got on the call and I'm like, we are not calling these COVID meetings anymore. This sounds so silly, but it was so important. We're gonna call these success meetings. And we're gonna talk about what we can do to change this. And I said, what if this was the best thing that ever happened to us? What if, hey, and then I finally said to him, hey, what if we now, we've got all this free time where we're not running those crazy retail stores with all that break fix and issues and hiring people and all that stuff going on. What are we gonna do with all of that time? And it just went silent for a little while, because we're on Zoom or whatever. And then they're like, wow, well, we've been talking about really accelerating our digital transformation and becoming much more omni-channel and flipping the switch on a new warehouse management system and moving all of, getting a buy online, pick up in store. We leapfrogged about 2 years of digital transformation during COVID. Because what was IT doing? They weren't fixing all the stores. They weren't doing POS. They weren't doing all the stuff that just sucks all the life out of you when you're actually running a fleet. And we shifted to that, and we ended up, 2021 was the most profitable year in our history, followed by 2022 now being the most profitable year in our history.
That's amazing, and I think, as you said, the two themes I just heard out of that, one is resource allocation. I mean, this did disrupt enough where you decided to shift resources to another key strategic pillar for your business. And then the other one, I love that you just said the reframe, because I do think that is so important during that time frame, shifting from a COVID meeting, which has a certain connotation, to a success meeting. It does reframe you going into that meeting on mindset, on what is your purpose there, what's the objective, and why are you having this daily, especially on Saturdays and Sundays. I think that would be a little more motivating. So I think that's quite impressive.
Well, the one thing about COVID too that I'd like to bring up is, look, that's in the past now. And as leaders, visionaries, I hope you're focusing mostly on the future. You look to the past to assess things, to gain that knowledge, hopefully to be collecting all of these file folders about how to then operate with more instinctual, in a more instinctual manner. But when I look around today, and maybe not in the most acute of ways like it was with COVID, with the crisis so obvious, we're still in a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And how do you take those tools, maybe some tools that you didn't realize that you had honed, particularly that instinctual tool, or the ability to connect dots and see around corners, and utilize that every day in this environment where the data, here's the flip side, the data is overwhelming. There's too much data for you to run your company and your business effectively. When would you ever believe we would get to that point?
I think you are right. I think probably many people are smiling right now where you are sitting on a tremendous amount of data. The challenge is, how do you pull out the insights? How does your team then employ those insights and actually, God bless you, drive profitable revenue in the future? And I think you're right. I think it's a huge challenge. I think segueing now, just as you were saying, let's put the past aside. The micro macro economic conditions right now are still quite volatile. And as a result, I would say consumer behavior, I think we touched on this, is definitely a little bit mercurial, to put it mildly. So looking for now or the next year, or let's just say a few quarters, what are the strategies that you're employing to drive that success? Because as you said, you're coming off of 2021, 2022 phenomenal success. How are you going to do this for this year?
Well, again, back to you have to look at the data, you have to use the data, but you can't let the data use you.
Agreed.
And that's the recognition of how to think through from a consumer-centric perspective. And what we did with Build-A-Bear back to brands is the recognition that this brand is so much bigger than the company.
Yeah.
And we needed to rebuild the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, the organizational infrastructure, and the objective was to pivot the company, to go from a retailer that through now 225 million little heart ceremonies has created this super strong piece of intellectual property to a branded intellectual property company that just happens to have vertical retail as one of its revenue streams. So over the past few years, through a lot of turmoil, whether it's COVID or Brexit or the retail apocalypse, we've now created a new company where we have the revenue stream of vertical retail, where we're expanding into tourist locations and diversifying from malls, to entertainment, to a robust e-commerce business, to outbound licensing, an entirely new infrastructure to build this brand and extract and monetize that value, because Build-A-Bear is one of those brands that understands the importance of it's all about the way it makes you feel. And now 40% of our sales are actually to teens and adults. So if you haven't been to Build-A-Bear, maybe you should go. But
unlock your inner child. That is the takeaway from today.
And the last thing, the only reason I actually brought this piece of paper was because I would be afraid that I wouldn't be able to remember this. When I was researching VUCA, because we knew what we were going to talk about, there's now some data, or excuse me, some words that they've applied to the antithesis of VUCA that I want to leave you with to think about on a new VUCA. To sort of combat the volatility, make sure you have a vision. Because the volatility, it's the ups and downs in the now. It's like just being on, like what we were on last night. It was a pretty choppy sea.
It was a unique experience.
A little bit of whitecaps out there.
Yes.
But when you look out on the horizon, it always looks a lot calmer.
Absolutely.
And having that vision helps you through those volatile times. On the uncertainty, it's just having that understanding, that's your instincts. The understanding that even in certain times in the moment, if you get far enough out, there's an understanding, there's a bigger arc, there's a way that you can kind of work your way through this with the big ideas versus the small ideas leading your path.
So you don't get lost in the minutiae.
So you don't get lost in the minutiae, so you don't get sucked into the data.
Yeah.
You see the arc of the data. In complexity, you look for clarity. Yes. And then in the ambiguity, just make sure you have a company, an organization, and a brain that's ready to be agile in the moment. So those are your new VUCA words.
I love it. I will say the vision piece, I think it's very interesting, and still with so many different variables in the universe these days. The vision, coming back to it, can seem so simple, but is so important for companies to invest the resources, meaning time and human capital, really getting that crisp.
Yes.
And making sure not only that the leader is aware of it, but every single employee in the company, truly going back to your words, feels it.
Right.
They understand it, they feel it, they're advocates of it, and they can explain it to others. And it's quite impactful.
100%. And that's such an important comment, because the vision is not just about the company vision.
Correct.
It's not just about the vision of how I'm going to build this business. The vision has to be something that's bigger than the company, bigger than you, bigger than really big idea, because even in all of the volatility that we've been through, the organizations that made it through that, maybe even thrived through it, tend to be the ones where there's something that organization, every individual understood what you were trying to do, why you were trying to do it, and then it was bigger than making money, bigger than being profitable,
Correct.
bigger.
There's
it
a
was all
purpose.
about a purpose.
There's a purpose.
About, does Build-A-Bear deserve to exist? I've had this conversation in front of my entire organization. Are we going to come together? Does Build-A-Bear deserve to exist? Is this world a better place with or without Build-A-Bear? And the resounding answer was with. I'm like, so we're going to make it through this. I can't do it alone, but we can do it together. And that was the shift. And our mission statement is that we add a little more heart to life. And we believe that. And if you can really infuse that concept, or whatever your concept is that's bigger than you and bigger than your company, that keeps organizations together and moving in the right direction. And we believe that vision, not just on the corporate level, but the way we treat people, the way we treat our guests, the way we treat our vendors, the way we treat our factories, the way we treat everyone.
It's your ethos.
It's our ethos, and it makes a difference.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any last quick words for any leadership advice for anyone beyond that?
One last quick word, and you're hearing a lot about this, is that when we talk about being able to be in touch with your instincts, and certainly you have to do all of the data and the math, and you have to make sure that you're not shooting from the hip in your life or in your business. But remember that your instincts sometimes are quiet. And if your life is too loud, your business is too loud, there's too many loud people talking, you never have that moment to get centered, and it becomes harder and harder the more senior and senior you get. You have to find that moment, that time, that energy for you to calm yourself and really listen to those instincts, and it makes a big difference.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.